this topic can be really specific or really broad, depending on the context.
We are now live.
All right, so I guess I'm starting. Okay, my name is Leila Rao, and you're here for the Making the Business Case for DevSecOps. And to give you some context, I'm an Agile coach. So obviously this is not going to be a very technical conversation, but to achieve the objectives that this community cares about, you have to work with business stakeholders. So how do you have that conversation? How do you convince them to invest in you and the outcomes that you care about? David?
Hi, thanks. David Prince here. Nice to meet you all over the internet. Yeah, I'm a cybersecurity consultant. I help clients a lot with cybersecurity teams, especially kind of transferring to Agile and helping them kind of bolster their Agile capabilities from a cybersecurity perspective. And I guess I'm really excited by this talk because a lot of the challenges I see with organizations is security functions not being, I guess, embedded within that DevOps process. And actually there's a lot of struggle, and it's not about the security controls and the technical tooling and the kind of technical capabilities. It's more around how to create high-performing teams that work really well together. So yeah, really excited to hear, I guess, specific challenges from the audience. Good to meet you.
Okay, I'll jump in. I'll introduce myself as well. So I'm Didar. I'm a cyber risk manager by day, and I've been helping with organization of the summit this year. And I'm trying to, so in my current role, I'm not very technical, and with my background, I'm not very technical, but I have found a passion to work with the developers and engineers and solve their security problems. And I then later found out that was called DevSecOps and AppSec. So I'm trying to get into those fields, and because my current company doesn't have it currently, I am really interested to find out how can I make this happen? How can I sell it to them?
All right, David, do you want to start off or should I jump in?
You go right ahead.
Okay, so a lot of this is going to be context dependent. As I'm pretty sure you can tell from the accent, I'm American. And I'm in the New York City area. Most of my clients tend to be US federal government agencies or very large organizations. These are organizations that have already understood the value of cybersecurity, the risk component. This is part of their mission statement these days. So I don't have to make that case, but I still have to make the case about, David mentioned Agile. I'm an Agile coach. So how do you balance these two things? How do you get the innovation and openness that comes with Agile while doing the risk and incorporating that, getting those two to play along? I will tell you, my first interaction with DevSecOps team was basically, we hate Agile. We don't want to be part of this. I'm like, okay, there's a foundation for a great relationship. The idea really comes down to is you have to build relationships and learn to hear each other talk. It's hard. We're all experts in our own field. And taking us out of our own mindset and saying, okay, what is important to you? It's a practice that does take some time to get used to. There's no substitute for it. And you can't start it just when you need something from somebody else. Prepping the ground before you need relationships is critical. Learn to get to know them, get them to know you. You know, for me, I have to take away the Agile baggage that a lot of people have. Oh my God, no, Agile doesn't work for us. It's too chaotic, it's too risky. And I have to say, okay, let's say Agile for a moment. Let's talk. What are you guys trying to do? What's important to you? So integrate yourself into their worldview, into their process, speak their language. That is where you have to start. Now, how you do it is going to be very much context dependent. My general advice is start before you need it, start casual, build friendships, get them to know you as a person, not just as a DevSecOps person. Who else has ideas on this?
Well, I can bring my experience. So I'm Alessandro. I'm head of security in a financial company in Germany, so technically a bank. It's a startup as well, so very small organization, joined last year around 40 people. And of course, as head of security, I didn't have a team yet, so I had to start somewhere, and that's where I decided to start. So we didn't have even a DevOps team. But the company was already agile. So what I did was introducing a DevOps function, taking, for example, backend developers that were interested into this kind of work. So I tried to basically to build a small team that would support the platform operation and product engineering. Let's say, so with two kind of, so the approach was using two type of roadmap. On one side, we had a roadmap for DevOps and DevSecOps, where we were supporting engineering, for example, with tools related to security testing inside the CI/CD, for example. So for what concerns vulnerability scans or dependency, or also itself by maintaining the actual CI/CD tools. So, and then with time, I tried to basically organize myself around two roadmap. On one side, let's say what was the security and infrastructure roadmap, on one side that we were discussing internally, and a roadmap that we had shared with product and engineering teams, and that was revolving around DevSecOps task. We still have a lot of things to do, but for now it's working. The team is growing. It's now a team of 5 people. Yeah, so in my cases, I could measure several improvements. Of course, far from perfect, but at least in my case, the approach worked.
Awesome. And so many things that you mentioned are spot on. You mentioned having a roadmap. You mentioned doing it together and starting getting better. Yes, this is not a one and done conversation or process. This is very much an ongoing relationship, an ongoing figuring out what needs to be done and how to get it done.
Shall we define what DevSecOps mean? Because I'm hearing DevSecOps and AppSec. What is the difference? For example, is it the only infrastructure part that is the difference, or why? What do you think?
I think if you ask 10 different people, they will give you probably 20 different answers. So my answer to that, at least the one I prefer, is that DevOps is a methodology, is an approach. And DevSecOps is an extension of the DevOps methodology that focuses also on security. So it tries to put the word security in it to make sure that nobody forgets it. So security should also be the job of SecOps. DevOps should also be the job of developers. So the word sec is just work around, in my opinion, to try to embed security everywhere. And at least that's my version of it.
So inside and outside the pipeline, having some security testing and handling what you find from those testing, and some monitoring metrics. And
yes, it's actually, I would say from my perspective, it's a let's call it backdoor, like it's a poetic license. It's a backdoor that traditional security organization has to approach security, so to embed into the agile process of a company. So if the company has already agile, is using agile methodology, having somebody in the company that works, let's say, dotted line, reports to security, and it's also actively participating into the product and engineering process of the company with DevOps, DevSecOps, the way you want it. It allows you to embed your requirements directly inside, exactly inside the pipeline. So you could, instead of saying, hey guys, by the way, can you please report on the vulnerabilities of this application? You could just say, okay, let's embed vulnerability scans wherever we can. So for example, Docker containers, or if we're using a JavaScript framework on NPM dependencies, or like, if we're based on GitHub, we could even run for example, GitHub Cloud also allows you to run static code analysis on open source tool, or there are also some other tools that you can integrate from third-party companies, and are all things that now, like thanks to DevSecOps, to this approach, in my opinion, you can actively introduce inside your company. Of course, if the company doesn't, if the engineering and product, if they don't use Agile, in my opinion, that's more difficult, because that's the first step probably to be able to use DevSecOps.
Do you want to do my job? Because it's spot on. Absolutely, yes. So it starts with Agile. That's part of the pipeline. Then you add DevOps. Then you add DevSecOps. It's really about a methodology, it's also the mindset. It's caring about these things. It's deconstructing these abstract values like either agility or security or governance into requirements that can be consumed by the teams doing it. You're mentioning being part of the product engineering process. Absolutely, yes. You can't sit outside and say, at the end, let me know and I'll approve it. It doesn't work that way, especially not in Agile. So jump in, be part of the process, understand how the pipeline is working, and figure out how to integrate your needs, your priorities into the pipeline. We're not creating a whole new pipeline for DevSecOps. It's reusing what's already there. Every organization that is doing DevSecOps has done Agile and DevOps. Like, there is a prerequisite there, okay, that I know of. I'm sure some company somewhere has broken the rules, but generally speaking, when DevSecOps comes in, there is already an established process and pipeline and culture that is Agile, that is DevOps. And especially in terms of DevOps, you want to be able to reuse that pipeline as much as possible. That is part of how you get buy-in. Most of my job is being the translator between business and tech. And I can tell you, we often have technical experts come in and say, we really need this. And by the way, the check is $1 million. Like, wait, what am I paying for? What am I getting? You're going to have a whole lot more success having those conversations if you can say, we're going to be reusing what you already have for these attributes. Here are the extra additional components we need. Here's why we need them. Here's the business value for those.
Yeah, or even improving it. So in my case, we didn't just say, let's help you, let's have things in your pipeline. We said, okay, look, you're missing a DevOps team. Let's build one. We're going to actually maintain your pipelines. We actually migrated it from, we were using GitLab CI, we moved it to something else. And in the process, we rewrote everything. And we took also the improvement suggestion from the product engineering team. So the end result was much better than where we started from.
Yeah, but you went through that journey. How did you convince people to go through that journey?
Well, wow, that's a bit difficult now, more than a year. So, I mean, I tried different approach. So the people approach was the one I followed. So I tried to discuss with product managers, with product owners about the issues that we had and that we wanted to solve, not only security, but also engineering. So when I saw something that didn't work in the pipeline or something that was not scaling, I saw that as an opportunity to say, okay, by the way, if instead of having developer time dedicated to maintaining this, we could, for example, introduce a figure or maybe repurpose somebody interested into the engineering team to actually maintaining actively every process that is supporting engineering a product in the release. So we started with the CI/CD actually taking ownership of it and trying to improve it, and then starting to embed, let's say after a couple of months, first automation tools in terms of vulnerability scan or static application so SaaS and so on. It came with the time. So we first had to actually improve the CI/CD, show some results, get product and engineering to like us in what we were doing. And this allowed us to have this kind of double roadmap. So one that we were showing to them that was giving value to the engineering and product, and at the same time having our own security roadmap that was improving the process to embed security as much as possible. So like we're even discussing regression testing, for example, as part of security, because for example, if you have a vulnerability and you are deploying a fix, you want to be sure that it's not going away in the next release, right? So for example, like we're discussing also in terms of like the DevSecOps in our case, we're sitting down talking about coverage or quality of testing, of regression testing, or end-to-end, and we consider that also as part of DevSecOps.
So I guess there's like two different streams to that. One is you have to convince the top people, the leadership, and the other is you go to the people who actually do the job of do the engineering and developing, and you start the work from there and work it up because in some hypothetical situation, you might not have the leadership decisions, formal decisions to do it, but then you might have to build it from the ground, even without naming it DevSecOps or anything, just step by step.
I mean, in my experience, at least here in Germany or Europe in general, it's very difficult to go to the board or to the management coming out of nowhere, bringing a business case that come from the outside. They say, hey, by the way, we want to allocate X in the next 12 months on DevSecOps or doing DevOps because we think this might be efficient. So in my case, I decided to go let's say bottom up, so trying the incremental approach where we started showing that we were bringing value very slowly. And of course, I discussed the strategy that I was following with the CTO and with the board. And I explained that this was a long-term strategy and it was something that our long-term goal was to reach, for example, the state where we are today, which is far from perfect, by the way. So we didn't want to, at least in my case, I noticed that it didn't really work to go there and say, okay, let's hire 5 people to introduce DevSecOps tomorrow, for example. So, yeah.
So from your example, it feels like you as security team, you've taken some action and ownership. You put your hand under the stone. But to do that, you must have had some expertise in the security team to do that stuff.
Yes. I also personally, I'm coming from more from a technical background. So yeah, like in my case, I had also the opportunity to be able to take ownership directly of certain aspects of what we were doing. And
does
also,
anybody else have any example where they didn't have the skill set inside already, and they had to sell this to some people to get those resources in? Did
That's
anybody?
actually my experience in one of my clients, and the way I do that is making a business case for it. So, you know, people talking to me saying, listen, we're doing this whole DevOps thing, but we're missing a security component. I'm like, wait, what is that? What am I missing? What's the value proposition here? So I did my research, and then I had to make the case to the CTO. Why do we need DevSecOps? That process is what we call defining the business case. And hopefully you can all see my screen. Business case is just a way of saying, why are you giving us money? Like, that's really what it boils down to, right? We're asking people to give us money to do something. And this is how we make the case. And making the case is, what is the justification to invest in this? Because DevSecOps is an investment. Most often business leaders are looking at very short term. And we're saying, listen, I get you're focused on your product and your releases, with other things that you also have to invest in. And no, you can't see it right now, but it's really, really important. That process of having that conversation is making the business case. What I would really, really emphasize here is figure out your problem statement. You have to be very clear for yourself before you can convince other people. It's not just, well, so-and-so says we should have DevSecOps, and this magazine mentioned it, not very convincing. Make it contextual for your organization. I said, I work in government and also in healthcare. For them, anything around compliance, risk, that gets their attention. So I phrase my business case around, this is a major risk and a liability for us if we don't address it. If this happens and we don't have a DevSecOps team ready, we're really going to be harmed in this way. Therefore, I think we should invest in DevSecOps, because if we don't, it's going to be a problem. And if we do, we're going to be better positioned to respond to challenges that are going to emerge. We might not know what those challenges are right now, but having a DevSecOps culture better positions us to respond to emerging threats.
I think just to, sorry, I was going to just to add to that. I guess where I've seen business cases land really well is having that defined problem statement. Fits entirely within the context of that business. And, you know, often that can be things like, you know, digital transformation, right? It can be around talking about the largest kind of tangible effects that underpin a problem that either exists today or will exist in the future, depending on the direction of the business and its strategy. And that has to be quantified. as best possible. And
Some
in my experience,
examples, like how can you quantify it?
in my experience, what I would say is absolutely link to your existing risk methodologies and frameworks within your organization. So that's one. The other is where you do quantify it. I mean, not everything you can quantify, but you need to think about.
For that one, like we went live with X number of vulnerabilities last 2 releases or something like that, quantify. Or
yeah, I mean, I would say that you have to be really careful with the data points that you use, because where we have organizations that kind of they report metrics to their board or their CISO or any kind of exec committee, and they talk about the number of incidents they've had over the course of the period. It's in the thousands, it's in the stratosphere. It means nothing because it's so high. You need to be really careful about the data points that you use, and to be honest, I tend to find you get better traction when you make the data points about something that is relevant to the people you're talking to. And so if you're talking to senior leadership, really you want to be talking about the efficacy of the workforce and the people. Why would you need to hire X number of people to deal with security in a traditional way when you could work in this way and reduce time and effort and investment in people through these processes? And a good way to bring that to life, if you can within your organization, is to identify a candidate change or program for a proof of concept. So find the friendlies within your business who you know and you want to work with. Start to pilot these new ways of working and use that as the premise for a business case, because then it's almost tried and tested. It's understood. And that's when you can really demonstrate that something was delivered cheaper than what it would ordinarily be and ahead of time. So
even before the problem statement, you do this. You run a small operation where you want the future to be, and then you can demonstrate benefits.
Yeah, and I think, and this is where it comes down to the context of the business, right? Because in some organizations, you would raise a business case to run a proof of concept, but that business case will be, in terms of money value, will be so low that it doesn't need to go to the board to be approved. You want 50K, 100K or whatever to run a proof of concept. Fine, that could be approved in some organizations fairly quickly, far more than say you need to invest, £2-3 million, let's say, in changing the way we work as a business, because that's systemic change and everyone needs to be bought into that. So depending on your business, you could just run it and start to present the results, or you can raise a mini business case, which should have a path of least resistance almost for approval.
I love the path of least resistance. Find yours. It is going to be different in every organization. Sometimes, yes, talking to a CIO saying, hey, could we just try this? If you're part of an agile team, come up with requirements, talk to your agile coach. They might be able to advocate for you. Start where you are. Who's going to be most receptive to you? And start building the conversation from there. So everybody else who's being really quiet, want to jump in and share your thoughts?
Hi, I had a question. See, very frequently when we talk to customers, I work in an IT services organization, and very frequently when we talk to customers who want to go take the DevSecOps route, we find that they are not much mature in the DevOps methodology itself. So is there an assessment methodology that you use to measure the maturity of their DevOps practices so that we can recommend, okay, you are in a mature enough to adopt DevSecOps?
There is a DevSecOps maturity model, but I don't know one for DevOps, because I didn't research for it.
There are maturity models for DevOps. There are just a lot of them. There's not one industry accepted standard. For my organizations, I help build a maturity model because the way we do it, it's agile, it's DevOps, it's DevSecOps. These things are layered on top of each other. You can't measure your DevSecOps maturity level without accounting for DevOps and agile. And we show, when I come into an organization, leaders want what I call bright new shiny objects. Whatever thing they've heard of at a conference or magazine, yes, we want DevOps. I'm like, okay, wait, can we first start doing Scrum? Can we figure out what Scrum means for you before we start rolling out DevOps? And that's what's happening with DevSecOps now. They know what it is, they want it, but they don't understand, in most cases I've seen, what the implications are. What are the prerequisites in terms of not just tools, but in terms of just process maturity, in terms of visibility, in terms of culture and technical skills of their people? All of those things have to be in place. So when someone says they want this, take some lessons from Agile, the next talk, but it's the same thing. Why do you want DevSecOps? What is the problem you're trying to solve? What do you mean by it? Are you ready for this process? Great, let me show you a roadmap. It might look like, by the way, do you have visibility into your standard IT process? If you're doing Agile, yes. If you're not doing it, figure out how to get that first. And then let's figure out, are you extending that visibility throughout operations and maintenance? DevOps, do you have that visibility? Then we can start layering in. And a lot of this role is going to be educational. So whether or not you want it, most of you are going to be in a coaching role. Title withstanding, that is the responsibility you're going to have in this process. And coaching means education. Starting where they are and showing them a path forward, helping them understand the scope and scale of this. And I think David mentioned earlier, finding those small experiments, great if you can. It's a balance of both. You want to show the big picture, how all these things fit together, and you also want to find a small way to show them what this could look like in their context.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
The roadmap, is that in the business case as well?
Okay, in my case, context matters. The business case refers to the roadmap because when I come onto an engagement, I create a roadmap with my clients. Basically, why am I here? Not just because you want an Agile coach to say you're Agile, right? What are we going to be doing together? How are we going to measure my success? That is my roadmap. So when I make a business case for DevSecOps, I connect it back to this. You wanted those outcomes. Those are already part of your plan. This adds to those. This enhances that in this way. Same way you reference roadmap, reference existing organizational material. If they have a vision or a strategy, tie it. Make yourselves relevant and impactful in terms of what the business cares about, which is typically things like OKRs, KPIs, strategic documents, roadmaps, whatever you have available to you, connect to those, make the link. This is called making the case.
I think that roadmap is really important, right? Because in any business case, you need to be clear on the benefits. And that includes kind of primary benefits, but also any secondary benefit. You know, so if you're talking about the secondary benefits of DevSecOps, actually it's far easier to build in things like, you know, security resilience or cyber resilience, or help the business achieve cyber resilience when you're doing it as part of a DevSecOps capability. Because you're right to the left. It's far easier to build in that kind of architecture. There's secondary benefits that are in many cases just as important as the primary benefits, depending on your business. But I think if you don't have a roadmap, you'll be putting across the benefits. The first question you're going to get is, well, when are we going to get them? And that's your roadmap. So, you know, it kind of has to be there. I mean, it'd be great to understand, I guess, more about the specific challenge you're facing in terms of maturity, because that could stem from lots of different places. I'd love to kind of dig into that a bit more. Can you provide a bit more context?
So those benefits, are they more qualitative or quantitative? Do you tie them to KPIs, KRIs, or what's the best way?
I think my stance on that is make everything as quantitative as you can, if it's reasonable to do it. If you're going to try to quantify things that will have huge error bars and would require a huge amount of effort to get there, then don't do it. But I think if you're creating a business case around changing the way in which your organization delivers, then there are lots of data points that are there, particularly in terms of things like budget and time, and then the utilization of people as well, and how much you're reproducing, you know, the waste that's produced. There are lots of data points that can be quantified. I think, you know, if anyone's making the business case for DevSecOps, your best friend would absolutely be any transformation lead or program lead you have in your organization. So some organizations are obviously much bigger and they've got a dedicated change engine, like a transformation business. Others are less. But if you can get close to someone who is responsible for delivery within your business, they can give you all the data points you need. And your challenge is going to be, okay, so which data points should we combine to tell a really compelling story? Because, you know, your business case can't be, you know, 50 pages long. It's got to be really crisp and concise.
I think there is also some other aspect to consider. So for example, that so DevOps or DevSecOps, it's not the what, it's the how. So you need already to sell. So if the management is not sold already to security, then it will be very, very difficult to sell anything that is related to DevOps, DevSecOps, or anything else. So for example, I went to open the OKR of the last year when we started introducing this, and where I presented this to the rest of the management was some of the OKRs were, for example, improving the general security of product, which is the what, or increase the product quality and reduce the cost of bugs by identifying the quality issues and security issue early in the development process, right? And how can you do that? And in my opinion, the most effective way to do that is using Agile, applying DevOps, DevSecOps principles, so like to embedding tests as much as you can in the pipeline, or to do this kind of, let's say, quality check around security and around testing of products early on. And of course, the way to introduce this, it can be either by a business case or not, but like really the main driver should be increasing the security. So then you can maybe sit down and say, okay, how are we going to do that? And it's going to be easier also if you need to prepare a business case. But if you don't have that first security requirement in mind, or rather not you, but I'm talking about the manager, everything becomes more complex.
I totally agree. Absolutely.
One thing that I've noted is that a lot of managers and a lot of people, you know, in higher up positions, they're more willing to listen if they think about the fact that pretty soon a lot of businesses that aren't focused on security aren't going to exist.
Yes. So, you know, you mentioned doing the data-centric approach. I find it more helpful to show them the bottom line. So talk in terms of risk and opportunities. And in a lot of cases, if you don't do DevSecOps correctly, you just may not survive the next 20 years in business. Like it's that fundamental. And if you're trying to get business stakeholders' attention, that's a pretty compelling business case. So if you can show them why it matters.
What was that approach called?
Common sense. So sorry, no, that was, it's part of, you know, understanding their mindset. So most business leaders, they care about bottom line. They care about surrounding the business. They care about reputation. So if you can make your business case and connect it to what matters to them, you're far more likely to get success. I don't know if there's an actual name for it other than just best practice.
Yeah, I think I generally agree with that statement. You know, having adequate cybersecurity in your business is a really critical imperative, particularly in the direction that most businesses are going. The reality is there are many business leaders out there that still just don't really connect with it. They're not compelled by it. It's something they've got to do, so they don't really give it the attention that it necessarily needs. And you know, that's a reality we're going to live with for a long time. And so understanding, as we've just said, what matters to the people we're talking to is really important. And when I do that, I call it kind of a center of the universe assessment, right? And I say to everyone, what is the center of your universe? What is most critical to you? Because then you can make sure that when you're communicating with people, you're taking into account the things that really drive them. You know, I could be really motivated at trying to embed security in my business, but if someone isn't motivated to go along with that, then I'm going to have one hell of a journey for sure.
Okay. Anyone else? We've got a couple people who are being very quiet. So I'm hoping that you're getting value, but if you do have questions or comments, please jump in.
I've got some thoughts on this. Hope you don't mind the fact that I'm not screen sharing. I've got some issues with my webcam. But I like to use the whole conundrum of DevSecOps, DevOps, and Agile. It's better if you simplify it, right? How does the DevOps, how did the model find itself? And it's actually years and years ago when developers started working on cloud infrastructure and platforms, and it then naturally became more efficient for them to handle the infrastructure they work on than have an operations technology team or a data team handle that. So you then negated the need for data center engineers to create those AWS or Azure hosted infrastructures, and it was on the onus of the developers. And then you go on a couple of years and you see stories within some of our largest organizations like your Facebooks and your Ubers and your Capital Ones, and not to pick bones at any of these organizations, but they suffer major data breaches and hacks as a result of insecure public cloud environments. And you can almost take steps back in that journey and discover, why did that happen? It's because, the insecurity of their cloud environments were because when they developed them and when their developers were doing the operational tasks, they weren't thinking about security. And that's the use case. That's the story behind DevSecOps. You need someone within a DevSecOps role, whether you're coming from security governance and you learn about Agile and DevOps, or whether you're coming from DevOps or DevSecOps, or you're an ex-developer who then starts learning about security. It can be done either way, but I think that's the story that you tell. Most of my clients, I'm seeing challenges here is they do DevSecOps quite well and they do Agile well, but they're large organizations and they've got many projects. And then what they then have is they've got, let's say, for example, you've got 10 projects. You've got 10 projects all doing DevSecOps differently, and there's no standard across the board. And there's no standard because when you're working in an Agile environment, you don't really document. I mean, it's not really the right thing to do, although documentation should happen. People don't document as a first thought. And then as a result, you have no reference for standards. And I think at least sort of trying to think about the challenges that I'm seeing there is standardization of DevSecOps practices. And again, probably going back to some of the other points raised in this talk about how there's a lack of one right way of doing DevOps and DevSecOps in the industry, but there's loads of guidance out there.
I think you touched on a lot of really interesting points there. I'm trying to remember all of them. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. I liked the kind of you stepping through the journey of DevOps. I think it's really important, right? Because security has followed that same journey by kind of bedding into that kind of DevOps way of working. I think your point on documentation is an interesting one, and also the different ways in which DevSecOps is applied in businesses. I also see lots of variances and discrepancies. Some of them are okay, some of them aren't, right? So I think there are an underlying set of principles that have to be applied that can accommodate slight differences in the way that certain things are implemented. So you certainly wouldn't want entirely different tooling for different projects, for example. I mean, that's obviously a big no-no. And you wouldn't want significant differences in the way that you perform things like threat modeling and core kind of risk assessment based, risk analysis based processes. These are things that need to be reproducible as much as possible. Similarly with any kind of orchestration or automation of that tooling. But I do see these challenges where actually those differences kind of go a bit too far. The documentation point is also really interesting because doing things in Agile doesn't mean you're not documenting. And I see this all the time with the people I work with across different clients is we don't need to document anymore because it's not waterfall. We don't need to do these big documents. And actually, yeah, you don't need to do those documents in the same way. You don't need to produce the exact same artifacts, but you do need to produce really important documentation, perhaps in your collaboration tool, because control, traceability, risk assessments is still really important stuff, and you need it to demonstrate compliance. You need it to demonstrate your risk position, because actually a move in risk position could have been one of the benefits that you sold in your business case, let alone any other kind of regulatory requirements that would be there. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. Does anyone else have any other points on that? There was kind of a lot covered.
Leila has
the one thing I will add to that is, yes, the idea that Agile doesn't want documentation, that's a myth. So I will absolutely flat out argue that case. But there's a phrase that I use that may help you have that conversation. Highly aligned, tightly aligned, I can't type, tightly aligned, loosely coupled. What that basically means is each group figures out how they're doing their own thing, but we're very clear on the destination and where the intersections are. Not every standardization does not mean we all do everything alike. Knowledge work, this is not manufacturing. People don't fit in nice little boxes that way. But as long as we're very clear that we're going toward the same direction and that we're all looking at the same checkpoints, that's fine. So an example that you mentioned, the variations, are they insignificant? Are they critical? Are the variations happening at the intersections? or the outcomes, or are they somewhere in between? That's what matters. In some cases, variations, no problem. Other cases, uh-oh, watch out. And this is going to be very contextual. In your organization, what is not a problem? What is a critical point?
Yeah. The thing to watch out for, I guess more from a cybersecurity perspective, more specifically, is, you know, one of the underlying benefits of DevOps and DevSecOps is the reproducibility. And if you're finding deviations in things like architecture patterns and other really critical artifacts, then actually you're reproducing potentially bad stuff. And that sorry, go
on. I feel that so the issue with reproducibility and documentation in theory can be addressed in a very similar way. So at least the way I'm trying to do this is, for example, to use the very same repository that we use the code for the documentation. So in our case, for our DevOps team, we embrace infrastructure as code. So that means that we're using Ansible, Terraform. We have a separate repository for application and for the infrastructure. Of course, developers are welcome also to commit, you know, every pull request needs to be reviewed on the infrastructure repository as well. And so we're able at the same time to document the changes around application, infrastructure, also not only in terms of commit, but also in terms of README, for example, or in the case of in which we have bigger feature, of course, we still go back to the classical design. So we have technical design document, we have our own definition of ready, definition of done with requirements that are needed before we can actually start doing something, depending on what it is. Let's say, but so where possible, we try to streamline the documentation process, and also, like my feeling is the DevOps methodology, once applied, if done correctly, should also get to the point where everything can be reproduced. And let's say if I have a team of people that has enough, so a person with enough skill should be able to look at the code and understand what the code is doing out in one side, and they should also be possible to use this code or the documentation within it to show an auditor that a certain process was followed in a certain way, or that, for example, the same CI/CD tools to show what were the tests that were done on a release before it went to production concerning unit test integration, end-to-end regression testing, SAS, test tool, did they run, what did they say, what was the result on the specific release, where are the artifacts of that are stored inside the CI/CD. In that case, could be Jenkins, Tomcat, whatever that is. So in the long term, in my opinion, it really pays to follow this approach of, let's say, embracing the methodology as a whole and trying to use it there to application infrastructure to try to be holistic in the approach. And in my opinion, it's more like going back to agile. Still, it's an extension of what should be the agile development process or the software development lifecycle in a company. So like DevOps should be a component of it. Yeah.
So you mentioned infrastructure as code, and many of these new concepts and methodologies, they work with configuration files. And different teams might have different versions of them, but do you like publish some best practice or baseline stuff that you need them to make sure in somewhere else, like on Confluence or some other repository that is not the tool itself?
You mean the configuration itself, or?
So things to look, things to make sure you get right for the configuration when the teams go and do it themselves. They should be checking the secrets or the encryption or this and that and your standards, basically. Do you put that somewhere? How do you document that part?
I mean, in terms of requirement, yes. So you would have let's say in Confluence, for example, you would have a list of requirements, or like I mentioned before, in the case of the application definition of RAID, you've done, where you basically try to put a functional and non-functional requirements, say, okay, do we need encryption? Do we not? depends also on what is the specific component. Then during the implementation, for example, at least in our case, because we're I would say we are pretty much regulated. So that means that every PR needs to be code reviewed. So code review in our case is mandatory. So and before something can be merged, you need also a senior engineer to actually review that, which means that you will need somebody else that will make also sure that
review or really review.
Well, really reviewed. That's also why I mean, it's far from perfect. You also need to make sure that, for example, you have proper audit in place, or you still need to have penetration testing, for example, or internal external auditor. It's but in general, at least from what I could see, so in my case, it happens very often that a senior engineer that is reviewing something comes back to me and say, "Hey, by the way, Alessandro, okay, do you know this this KMS entry? I'm not sure this is being used properly." Yeah, and for me, that's a sign that somehow it's a positive sign that that this is somehow working. And of course, it's also like I mentioned before. In my opinion, it's an iterative process. So you want to improve with time. It means that at the very beginning, you might not be able to do everything you want with code review, or they're not working the way you want, and you can still see that you have some release in production, they have more vulnerability that you want, and that's where you have to try to correct it, right? And that's where you want to be, let's say, agile in every sense, and you want to correct the process and iterate it faster and try to be better. And that's what we're trying to do, like trying to improve our process to like, for example, we are doing infrastructure as code, but our infrastructure is far from being 100% automated. So, but we still were trying to reach the goal, because in the moment in which we can say that everything can be completely reproducible by looking at what is in our repository, in our code base, we can also, I mean, apart from the satisfaction of it, but it also brings value to the company in the business.
So we have like 10 minutes to start the next section of this session, which will be the agile in cybersecurity. But so in this last 10 minutes, what do we want to focus on?
For those of you who haven't yet spoken up, is this what you were expecting? Or is there something that you had in mind that we didn't address? I would love to hear those.
This is about what I was looking for, what I was expecting. I'm a compliance officer, so this part of it is very, very new for me. So this is really great information.
Great, that's good to know, and actually quite timely as well, because I was just going to say, where I guess one of the really common, frequent challenges I see with some organizations where they're kind of almost thrown into DevSecOps is around being able to demonstrate compliance. So you see a lot of organizations whereby actually they're not in a position where they've been able to translate their high-level policies and controls into something that can be delivered in an agile way. So I've seen quite a few organizations whereby actually, the team is, the DevOps team is, it's high performing, it's moving really quickly, and then the security people within that are kind of, I'm not sure how to translate these really high level controls, maybe the ISF or 27001 into something that's agile. How do I create user stories and features from these? And it can cause massive delays and massive disruption. So I think one thing that's, I think, really critical to have that high performing team in DevSecOps is being really clear and having documented those control mappings, because without it you can't really start, and it takes quite a bit of effort to actually get there and get that defined. Yeah,
it's actually the exact spot that I'm in right now.
Right, okay. Sure, and actually, I mean, that comes with, I mean, there's no doubt that's a lot of effort, but actually, if you're going on that journey of DevSecOps, there are a lot of activities that as individuals we're all really used to doing. So from a security perspective, we're really used to doing threat assessments. We're really used to doing risk assessments. We're familiar with security control frameworks, etc. But maybe we're less familiar with actually the CI/CD pipeline. We're less familiar with what happens when that code goes in that bit over there and then churns this bit out. And actually, there's this opportunity for us to kind of share our own perspectives when we look at things. So where we kind of, we should all be able to define together things like definition of done, definition of ready, and kind of the root cause analysis and all that stuff. There's opportunity in the emerging stages of DevSecOps to do those things as larger groups. And then when everyone is familiar, you can start to kind of disband a bit more.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to be doing a lot of side-by-sides with our dev group soon. Not really side-by-sides because we're not in office, but soon I'll be starting to figure out how their flow is really working so we can figure out how to get the security built in.
Brilliant.
There's actually some really useful standards and guides out there. So high-level guides by OWASP. It's their software assurance model.
Yeah, I've been reading a lot of OWASP stuff the last couple of weeks.
And then NIST have just released a couple months ago their SSDF.
Yep.
Secure Software Development Framework. And then I suppose that's high-level program stuff. If you then peel that away and go to the low-level control assessments, you then look at the OWASP application security verification standards. And so, the SDSDF will show you what you should do, but the control standards show you sort of how you should do it. I think there's things out there, but it's just knowing where to find it and knowing what to use.
Yeah, I found a lot of helpful information online, and thankfully I have some good resources at the office too. So and we'll get there.
Place this summer. We will have some sessions. I can't remember which day, but for ASVS, we're gonna try to create some user stories from ASVS, which will be quite useful.
Yeah, and the other thing is, if you look at things like different agile methodologies, like SAFe, for example, they come with a lot of really common user stories as well. So they kind of give you a bit of a head start, which is quite useful.
Great, thank you so much.
One thing I think we haven't talked enough of is the data points that David kept mentioning, but I don't think we have enough time to go into details of them.
I could put some on GitHub. Share them around.
I was going to say the outcome document, but GitHub is better. We can link to it and stuff. So we mentioned some standards, the NIST one. Which others did you guys? You mentioned OWASP, secure. I should know this, right? Secure
SAM, secure assurance methodology model. I think it's that.
Yep.
It used to be called the Open SAM, but I think OWASP acquired the rights. And then NIST's SSDF. I think those are two pretty good ones for program level reviews. Don't know if anyone else has come across any others.
So the one I'm sharing here is a good one to understand where your organization is at, and you can build your roadmap from that. It's quite useful for that one. And OWASP SAM, they have an all-day conference today running in parallel to this one. So I don't know if they will be sharing all their recordings as we do, but yeah, you can check them out.
I've come across another model, which is BSIMM, Build Security in Maturity Model. I have also found that to be pretty useful. BSIMM, Build Security in Maturity Model.
Cool.
Yeah, the matrix is on screen right now. I find it very helpful because this is what I use to build roadmaps. What are we doing well? What's missing? What are the fundamental gaps in our current maturity before we can layer on new things?
Okay. Any questions?
Any last questions before we shift topic? So everybody now knows how to make a business case for DevSecOps. You're going to go home and convince all of your organizations to invest, right?
Yeah, I'm going to start at home doing DevSecOps. That's my proof of concept. That was a joke. Sorry.
Tough crowd.
DevSecOps for hire.
If you have kids, that would be an interesting experience.
Oh man.
Okay then, let's maybe take a 2-minute break, refresh your drinks, get some snacks or some comfort break, and shall we meet back in 2 minutes?
And just as an FYI, in 2 minutes, we're going to be talking about Agile and cybersecurity. There is going to be some parallels between this conversation and that one, in part because I'm doing both. So if you are doing Agile and cybersecurity, I would love to hear your stories, and let's talk about what's working and what we could do better.
Thank you. And there's no way for me to, oops, I lost you guys.
Can we stop the live on YouTube part?
No, I can only stop it for good, so I don't want to do that. Or I can stop live stream now and restart